Okay, so with that, I'd like to bring on my guest, Jim Tompkins. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rob. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And before we get started, I want to congratulate you. Jim just wrote a new book. It's called Insightful Leadership. I had a chance to read it. It's an excellent read. I encourage everyone to read it. In fact, if you look at the show notes, we're going to give away 15 free copies on today's show. So look in the notes for how to get a copy of this. It's a great read. Congratulations on this, by the way, Jim.
Thank you.
So, Jim, let's get started if we could. I thought maybe for the listeners' benefit, if you don't mind, you've had a really storied career in supply chain, and I hope you wouldn't mind kind of walking us through, as far back as you want to, but how did you get started in this crazy business, and what have you been doing since?
Well, Rob, I will get to that. Let me touch on the rail strike. Union Pacific, BNSF, CSX, and Norfolk Southern is a big deal, and 2 billion. But I also think we should point out the UK rail strike that's happening at the end of this month. So there's lots of difficulty. Not to mention the ILWU on the West Coast. So yeah, labor issues are huge. And that's one of the reasons I got into this career, because it's a huge opportunity for continuous learning and continuously developing. I mean, it's such a broad field. I began this pursuit of my career at Purdue University. I got my bachelor's degree there with a kind of a thought process of getting into the logistics, physical distribution space. We didn't have the word supply chain back then, and then I got convinced to go after a master's degree, and I found that I doubled my educational value by getting my master's degree, and that stung me to pursue new knowledge about physical distribution and materials management. And so I stayed on for my PhD. So the foundation of my career is industrial engineering degrees from Purdue University. Interesting enough, then Dr. Tompkins had an opportunity to become Private Tompkins. I was drafted a total of 14 times, and the 14th time they got me, they said, "You will come now." And I said, "What are my options?" And they said, "Well, you can go to Canada, you can commit suicide, you can go to jail, or you can enlist for 3 years and we'll give you 3 months delayed entry." So I got 3 months delayed entry, finished my PhD, went into basic training, did my thing. They offered me a officer candidate school, but I would have to have an additional 6 months. And I said, "Gentlemen, I'm going to give you 3 years. I will dedicate myself to the U.S. Army, but it's not 3 years in a day. So I will stay a private. Thank you very much." Interestingly, the Army did a great job of utilizing me. And in fact, for 2 years and 9 months, I was in New Jersey, basically running the city called Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And I had 400 tradesmen. I had about $11 million worth of inventory. And what my job was is to maintain the city called Fort Monmouth. And so we got to get the right material, the right people, the right equipment to fix this new hot water heater, this broken hot water heater, or repair this roof that didn't work. And so it was a great job. And I got to use a lot of my education, and it was a great experience. I left there, went to North Carolina State University, where I desired to pursue a career in supply chain, and began teaching facilities planning, material handling, transportation, network design. And I realized that the university didn't pay as well as I thought they would. And so I started doing a little consulting on the side. 4 years later, my wife said to me, she said, "Do you know that your part-time income is 6 times larger than your full-time income?" And I said, "Well, no, I hadn't really looked at that." And so she said, "Well, maybe you ought to think about that." So then, to be clear, Rob, I made the decision. My wife did not tell me to quit the university, and that's my story, and I'm going to stick with it. But I did leave the university and went with the little consulting firm I started called Tompkins International. By year 2020, that had grown into a 300-person almost $200 million firm, and the business was great, but COVID hit. And so after 47 years at Tompkins International, I quit and decided I wanted to go in a business that dealt more with the global problems, and I wanted to deal at scale. And so I followed the network effect. I'm a big fan of Jeff Bezos, and Jeff Bezos had been preaching network effect, network effect. And so I said, I want to do the network effect. And so what I've done, I've now created at Tompkins Ventures a network of expertise that allows us to address a wide range of supply chain problems. We work in facilities, we work with capital, we work with logistics, we work with technology, and we work with leadership. And these are the 5 core functions of a business. And we bring these 5 core things to business, and we solve problems. And we find people that have problems, we have people have solutions, and we put them together. And so we are a matchmaking global network of solutions that allows us to help companies. And that's what Tompkins Ventures is. And we are really, really, really doing well. If I had any idea it would have worked this well, I would have started it earlier. But I really love what I'm doing. And we're bringing about a lot of success for a lot of folks around the world. So it's cool. Very cool.
Yeah, and Jim, as a beneficiary of that matchmaking service, I agree. It's phenomenal what you're doing, and we'll put notes in the show in terms of how they can reach out to you if anyone's in need of those services. Jim and his team do a phenomenal job. And Jim, I think, knows, or at least knows, or is in second degree separation from anybody who's anybody in this business. So if he doesn't know it, he'll know somebody who does. So Jim, so let me just start by, you've seen this supply chain industry over your 40 plus years, from academia all the way through to consulting and now to Tompkins Ventures. What trend in supply chain are you most excited about or encouraged by now? Fast forward to 2022, what are you thinking about in terms of what's next on the horizon?
Well, I think one of the things I'm most encouraged about is our positioning in supply chain. Right on the other side of this camera on my computer, there's a chair. And in March of 2020, my wife came in to this office and sat down. And I thought, oh, wow, what did I do wrong now? I mean, my wife never comes in here and sits down. And I thought, did I forget to take the trash out? Did I forget to knock down the Amazon boxes? And then she smiles. And I said, oh, wow, maybe I'm not in trouble. And she says, congratulations. I said, well, thank you. I said, why you give me congratulations? She said, because you are now legitimate. I thought, wow, Mom and Dad never told me. I've always thought I was legitimate. I said, what do you mean? She said, we've been married. This was 2 years ago. She said, we've been married 52 years. And for 52 years, I've had to explain to your friends, to my friends, to our kids, to our grandkids, what it is you do. And no one has a clue. She said, but now Marie called me yesterday, and Marie said, Marie's my wife's best friend. She said, and Marie said, I was just listening to the news and they're talking about supply chain. Isn't that what Jim does? And my wife said, yes. And so all of a sudden, our profession of supply chain like we've been, singing for 52 years in some little bar. And now all of a sudden, we're Elvis Presley and the Beatles combined. And so supply chain is hot. So that's one thing I like, is that we really now, we're now dealing at the board level and making really key impacts. Another trend is this whole thing towards digitization and how we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to create autonomous supply chain. And that's really, really, really cool for us to be looking at making smart warehouses, for us to making smart fulfillment centers, and for us to be able to create an environment that we can deal with uncertainty. And I think that's probably another trend that I see, is that we now really understand that the new normal is disruption. That's the basis of the book. The basis of the book is you cannot just sit back and do what we've done. You can't just have a strategy, a vision, a budget, a staff, and execute, because the fact of the matter is things are changing very rapidly. And so dealing with uncertainty, which is the new normal, which is reality, is something I'm really excited about, because it changes a lot of the paradigms. In fact, about 90% of what I knew in 2019 is irrelevant. And so we've had to relearn. And so we have a new profession that's respected, that really is getting engaged at the front level of digitization, and we have opportunities to reinvent how supply chain works. So it's a cool time to be doing what we're doing.
So I want to ask you about digitation in a second, but a funny thing when you're talking about supply chain being a thing, I saw a meme and it was a girl on the cover and she said, I haven't been able to get a date in 6 months, supply chain issues.
Yeah, it was my fault. I did it. My wife blamed me for it. Yeah.
So we become a thing when we've got memes that supply chain is responsible for dating woes. So Jimmy, talk about all these, disruptions are the new norm, uncertainty is the new norm, and in your view, digitization is the key towards addressing this new norm. How does that work? You mentioned a couple of tools like machine learning and artificial intelligence, but fundamentally, when a company's thinking about all the things you mentioned, their strategy, their budget, their sales forecast, all the normal things they do in their organization, how do they think about digitization as sort of a cornerstone to that strategy to make sure they can keep track of or respond quickly to all of these disruptions going on in the world? How do we connect those two things?
Well, the challenge we've had is we've been trained to think about our link. And in fact, most supply chain people don't do a chain. What they do is their link. And so how can I optimize my link to make sure that I'm doing my job better? But the fact of the matter is, in these uncertain times, your link is dependent upon the link before you, the link before that, the link before you, and your performance is based upon the link after you, link after you, link after you. So in fact, I don't even like the concept of a chain anymore. I prefer to think about it as a network. And as a digital supply network, what I want to have is real-time information from the raw material all the way through the manufacturing process, all the way through the distribution process, all the way up to the ultimate consumer. And in that way, what I can do is I can eliminate two words that have been associated but separate. And those two words are planning and execution. The fact of the matter is, in today's uncertain world, if you have planning and execution, you're not going to be able to be successful. I like to take the and out of that sentence, and I have one word, and there's no dash, there's no hyphen. The word is planning execution. That's one thing. And planning execution in a real-time mode, replans, re-execute in real time on the fly, because I know everything from end to end. And if I have that visibility and traceability, I now can control all the way from raw, all the way to the front porch when it gets delivered. And now I have the ability of reducing cost, improving performance, and having the product delivered when we promise, fulfilling the customer promise. That's what the digitization allows us to do that we never could do before.
Amazing summary. I have two points to make. One, I've got a question from an audience member that I want to run by you from Alejandra. But before I do that, I read an interesting quote. You talk about a supply chain network as opposed to a link, right? And I think that's a critical distinction. I heard someone call it if you think of a chain link fence, right? And you've got all these different nodes, but they're all connected to build this fence. I thought that was an interesting analogy as well. So supply chain network, supply chain link fence, whatever we're calling it this day, don't do nodes. I think that's the key point. Alexandra is asking this question, Jim. What would be your biggest concern you have about digitization? So you're talking about all the benefits. Do you also have concerns? Are there any things that people should worry about when they're thinking about their digital journey?
Yeah, my biggest concern is that people believe that it's still 2019. And they believe that the things, here's, in the book, the end of the book, what I say is, here's a guy named Charlie. He's been working for 38 years. He's now the chief supply chain officer of a major company. And his problem is he believes that what he's done for the last 38 years is relevant. And he doesn't throw that out and restart. I'm a PhD industrial engineer. So what do PhD industrial engineers? They optimize things. Guess what? Optimization ain't what it used to be because of the level of uncertainty. What I want to do is I want to optionize, and I want to do optionization. How can I optionize these solutions so that if this happens, I can do this. If this happens, I can do this. If this happens, I can do this. If I optimize and it doesn't happen, then I'm in deep, deep, deep doo-doo. So I think the thing that concerns me the most is that companies are not thinking anew. They're waiting for what they do to become relevant again, and that's not going to be successful. Your supply chain will fail, and therefore you will fail. And so I really encourage people get off the beach, get in the water, make something happen.
I want to cite another example from your book that I thought was really interesting. Is a CEO asking the COO why they couldn't make more refrigerators, or make them in Iowa. Why can't we make more of them? And the punchline of the story is that we can't get enough compressors. Well, they're made in Brazil. Why can't we get enough compressors? Well, the parts for the compressors are coming from China. So this digitization flows all over the place. You need to your point, from raw materials all the way through, have the data available so that you can comprehend your supply chain. Then to your point, I'm going to call it optionalize it. Start to use your word. So thank you for that. And hopefully that addressed your question, Alejandro. I also wanted to just give a shout out to Muhammad, who talked about the key takeaway that you gave, which is change is now constant. And so you got to be prepared for it. You have to digitize. So on that note, see, two ways I can go with this. I'll give you both questions and you decide which one you want to address. We've got about 4 minutes left, Jim. So either, what advice would you give to a person starting in supply chain today? Someone just starting out their career. We have a lot of students and young listeners, or you could take it from, what do you love about supply chain the most, or the opposite, which is, if you had a magic wand, what's the one thing you would change? So either one of those questions, we can riff off of that for the remaining minutes.
Okay, let me try to give a quick answer to both. The one with respect to somebody who's starting out, you got to get broad and you got to get deep. Okay, that's what makes supply chain so much fun. If you don't have the breadth, you need to understand plan, buy, make, move, store, sell. You got to understand the mega processes. But then what you got to do is you got to dig down deep into each one of those. So when we say move, that's transportation. You got to know ocean. You got to know truck. You got to know less than truck. You got to know parcel. You got to know final mile. You got to have first mile, middle mile, last mile. And so it's really, really about breadth and depth. So get a variety of experiences. Don't do the same job for 5 years. Now, I'm not saying leave your company, but get yourself in a different position so you get more breadth and more depth of experience. That's really, really, really critical. On the other issue about what is the thing that I want to eliminate the most, I already answered that. That is the people who are not thinking anew. This is a time for innovation. This is a time for entrepreneurship. This is a time for creating major change. And so what we need to do is we need to think big, make things happen.
Okay, so we got a few minutes left. I'm going to maybe leverage your knowledge for my last topic. When you get off, I'm going to talk a little bit about resilience. So when you, in fact, you dedicated a chapter in your book to resilience. I really loved it, chapter 9, for those of you who want to read it. But how do you think about resilience, Jim? You talked at the front end about all of this constant change and putting in digitization so that you're better prepared for it. So you come up with this word called resilience. You want to build a more resilient supply chain. What does that mean in the end? What does it mean that when I've succeeded with all the recommendations you've gotten, that I can claim to my board that I've got a more resilient supply chain? And here's how I have evidence that I've got a more resilient supply chain. What are the things that we're trying to address there?
Well, the topic of resilience, if we look at the mechanical engineering definition of resilience, resilience is the ability to bounce. And so if I drop a ball and it falls on the floor and goes splat, it has resilience of 0. If I drop a ball from this height and it bounces right back up and hits my hand, that has a resilience of 1.0. That's marvelous. And so what we need to understand is what we need to build is some digital supply networks that have the ability to bounce. So although the things that are happening weren't expected, we can deal with them and still get the product delivered on time. That's what resilience is about, is fulfilling the customer promise, even though it really hit the fan and it's not easy, but we're going to make it happen.
Fantastic. Great summary, Jim. This 25 minutes went by way too fast, but I want to thank you immensely for sharing your knowledge with this audience. Again, for those of you listening to this call or dialing in, we'll be handing out 15 copies of Jim's excellent book, Insightful Leadership, where you get what you just got in 20 minutes plus a lot more, and great stories. He's a great storyteller. And then we'll also put how to reach Jim. If you've got any questions, we'll put a contact in his organization that you can reach out to for additional insights. So Jim, thank you immensely for your time. I've really enjoyed it. I think we need to find a longer. 25 minutes is not nearly enough.
Thank you, Rob. I enjoyed being with you.
Thanks, Jim. Have a great day.
Bye now.